Okay, friends, we need to talk about this book. I'm still kind of mind blown that more people in this community are not talking about this book, and I am here to change that because holy buckets! The book in question that I'm going to be reviewing today is Nomads of the Sea by Kobe Zucker. This is a epic fantasy debut by the author. I was told ages ago, like we're talking a year and a half ago, by one of my very good friends, Kay from Kay's Hidden Shelf. Go down in the description box below and give her a subscribe and check out her videos because she's amazing. She's been trying to get me to read this book for a year and a half, you guys, at least. And I finally got it on my TBR and I've been really excited to read it, and I was not disappointed. Those of us who are like obsessive readers in the community, who read a ton of books, who are constantly exposed to a ton of things on our TBR, we know that we read a whole bunch of books and we're always looking for that book that just jumps out at us and says, this is one that you've been waiting for. I had no idea when I started it that this was going to be the kind of book that was going to reach through the pages, grab me, and pull me right in, because man, did it ever do that. So Nomads of the Sea is a military epic fantasy. It's also a nautical fantasy because the military conflict is set around an archipelago, which was very cool to me because that's something, it's a geographical location that I don't typically see in military fantasy. So that was already really intriguing to me. We have this kind of, plate armor knights kind of army that is joining hands with a tribal nautical group of people who are very, very different. These two groups are very, very different, and they're supposed to work together to quash a rebellion of some of the other tribes in these islands. Now, we get multiple points of view in this story, and the first one that we meet is Sig, who is a young warrior from the tribal community, and he is like that idealistic youth who's ready for battle. However, as the story goes along, Sig definitely learns a thing or two about what war is actually like. And the thing is, the idealistic young warrior is a character that has been in so many fantasy books. Like, do you even really have a fantasy book if you don't have the idealistic young warrior character archetype? This one, so well written. Sig is such a well written character, you guys. I didn't care that it was a tried and true trope. I didn't care that it was familiar. I was like, this character is so well written. He is a poster child for how this archetype can be written really, really well. The second main character we meet is Idalia Goss, who is the daughter of a great scientist back in the world that the kind of plate and armor soldiers are from. And she's really interested in discovering more about the magic that these tribes are connected with, because it's kind of an echo of the magic that her own people can use, but they seem to be so much stronger at it, and she is determined to discover why that is. So she's traveling along with the army, and she's in a relationship with the captain of this army, and she immediately starts to go out and learn from the people around her. Of course, she has her prejudices that she's coming in with, but she's so curious, and she desperately wants to know why their magic works the way that it does. Now, that being said, Idalia goes through a great arc as well, because she starts off having those prejudices of she already thinks she knows the answers, and the answers that the tribal members give her about their magic don't compute with what she thinks she already knows. So it's a really interesting character arc where she's coming in alongside the army, and she ends up getting pulled into a lot of military conflict that she was not prepared for. Again, also an incredibly well-written character. Then the book goes to our third POV, Bryn. Bryn is so far away from the military conflict that Sig and Idalia are a part of that at first I was like, why are you here? Bryn has a very interesting story because he is a mage of sorts for the country that Idalia is from, and they're so far removed from this like tribal conflict that's going on. But he's in exile, and he's a veteran of some of the most horrific wars that took place on his continent, and he was exiled for it, despite the fact that he helped his country win. Now, Bryn goes through some really hard moments in this story, and he has a really hard journey. He is maimed, he has been tortured, and his magic no longer works. Now, the cool part is, if you were like me and you're like, why is Bryn here? Don't worry, you'll get there. And it's a really interesting tie-in. Now let's move on to the magic system, because the magic system I thought was so interesting in this book. It is utilized by breath. There are particles of magic in the air that the user literally breathes in a certain way. It's not the same as breathing for oxygen, but it's a similar kind of idea where you're breathing in that magic and you can either hold it and then expel it, or you can let it out in short bursts. And there's a lot of different magical abilities that come with this gift. Not everybody can do it. Some can do it to a larger extent than others, as we see throughout the book. And everyone kind of seems to have a specific emphasis that they're particularly good at. Now, I think that breath-based magic systems are really freaking cool when they're done well, and this was done so well. You guys, it was done so well. Really interesting. And the thing that I loved about this magic system, and one of the things that I am kind of a stickler for, is I like a magic system. I'm a fantasy reader. I love a good magic system. I tend to lean a little bit more toward the soft magic system than the hard magic system. I don't want the magic system to take front and center in the story necessarily. I really like it when it is seamlessly integrated with some incredible characters. And this definitely delivered that in spades. I loved the magic system. Now let's talk about the combat. We're going to talk about the combat because as a military fantasy geek, writer, reader, love it. I've been listening to war stories since I was a little kid because my grandfather is a Civil War and World War II historian. So you guys, like, military stories in general are just in my DNA, okay? I have so many things that really get me about combat in stories, and it is very rare for me to read a book and be like, wow, the tactics, the actual hand-to-hand combat, the weaponry, the way the magic is utilized in combat. I'm still, like, this is a debut, you guys, and I'm just over here gushing about every single piece of this book. The combat is so good. It's so interesting because he's really aware of the geographical location that each battle takes place in. That is so important. It's not just about the characters who are involved. It's not just about the weapons or the magic that they're using. Where are the battles taking place? And I feel like that gets pushed to the back of so many combat scenes, and it's one of the reasons why I feel like a lot of people kind of skim over the combat because there's not enough different pieces in the scene to keep it interesting. Kobe Zucker does not fall into that trap at all. This is incredibly well-written combat, and there's so many different types of combat. There's magic combat, there's spears combat, there's we're fighting on boats combat, there's long-range combat. It's just hand-to-hand, like everything you could want in a military fantasy is right here. Let's talk about the writing style and the pacing, because that's another thing that I really wanted to mention in this review that I thought was stellar. The pacing of this book. Look, it's a chunk, okay? We love a chunk on this channel, and if you're an epic fantasy reader, you know that you cannot escape the chunks, right? There's amazing short books in this genre, but we love a good, chunky, epic fantasy book here. The thing that can be really tricky with that is that oftentimes these really long books struggle with pacing. There's a sloggy middle, or it feels like an avalanche all at the end where suddenly everything's happening in the last 10% and you have no idea what's going on. There's so many pitfalls. There's so many pitfalls to the pacing of a really long book like this. And it's equally as difficult to provide an interesting, intriguing plot with great characters that is bingeable and accessible. This book was impossible to put down. I had a horrible time putting it down. And it's so easy to read without sacrificing that really interesting, beautifully written plot. It's polished. It's snappy. The dialogue feels very real and very interesting. The world building is very lived in. He's really put a lot of thoughts into the hierarchy of these different cultures and all of the different tribes and their names and how they have different traditions and ways of approaching battle and life and magic and all of these different things. He's really lived in this world. And I love when I read a book where an author knows this world and really just dives in. Now, the other thing that's really cool about this book, and I know that there are potentially other books that may follow it, but honestly, it's really good just reading it on its own. I'm really looking forward to the next installment, but this first book, just by itself, is an incredible story, and I don't think that you're gonna find like a lack of closure, or it's a cliffhanger sort of at the end, and there's a door open for what the next installments might look like, but overall, it's a great story that it has a soft closure, I would say, at the end, so it's not unsatisfying when you get to the end of book one. The other thing that I'm loving is that it's definitely this very slow burn, we're collecting a motley crew kind of vibe. Love that. You guys know I love a motley crew, and boy, is there some great motley crew moments in this book. The other thing that I really need to mention about the characters that is so rare for me in multi-POV stories is I almost never really like all of the POVs. You know, there's always the favorite, and there's always the ones I'm like, yeah, that one's okay, but there's always a POV or two that I'm just, not really interested, I don't really like them, or whatever it might be. I loved every POV in this book, and I think that's one of the reasons why it was so bingeable to me, is there wasn't a character that would show up on screen and make me go, I don't really care about what's going on. I really was invested in all of the characters who had POVs in this book. There were a couple nitpicky things in the story of one of the three characters that I just kind of like didn't feel as fleshed out, I think, as the rest of the book, but it was only a small section in the middle, and it really overall didn't affect my enjoyment of the book as a whole. There's so many books out there that they're fine, they exist on the planet. And then there's those gems where you're reading through your TBR stack and you get to a book that you get that gut feeling where you just know this is going to be a good one. That is this book for me. This is definitely going to be one of my reads of the year. I cannot believe that this is a debut novel. This is a polished, well-written, fantastically executed book, and I could not be happier that I have finally read it, and you are going to be hearing me shouting from the rooftops about this book for a long time coming, because this book is so criminally underread and underhyped in our community, and I intend to fix that, starting with you. So if you've gotten to this point, and you've been listening to my review for this book, please go down in the description box below and find the Amazon link and click it, because this book deserves so much love. This is incredibly well written in so many ways. I really, really, really loved it. Thank you for watching this review. I really hope that this encourages you to add Nomads of the Sea by Kobe Zucker onto your TBR, or just buy it. Honestly, skip that part. Just buy it. Just have it shipped to your house this next week, and do yourself a favor. If you like any of the things I talked about in this book, I guarantee you this is a read you will not soon forget. It's fresh, it's interesting, it's fantastic, and I highly, highly recommend this book. I hope that you are having a fantastic week, and I know that you'll be reading a 5-star read soon because you'll be reading this book, and I will see you in the next video.